So I had the great privilege of going to the National Native Seed Conference, which was an online workshop presentation on February 7th and February 8th. And one of the keynote speakers was Jennifer Jewell, who was an incredibly eloquent, very well-spoken person. And one of her quotes from the day was that seeds are one of the greatest love stories of all time, which I thought would be appropriate for this group because seeds not only represent this long evolutionary process with pollinators and invertebrates, but also with people and the people who have tended to them for a very, very long time, since time immemorial, and have created these ecocultural landscapes, including Garryoke ecosystems, which all of us on the West Coast are connected to, which have a very, very long history of Indigenous management and Indigenous seed tending and planting and harvesting. And they also support a disproportionate number of rare species. The number of plants and animals in Garryoke ecosystems is well over 100 species that are listed at risk, either provincially and or federally. So it's in part because of the management of these ecosystems and maintaining them through fire and camas harvest of food plants that these ecosystems have such diversity of species, and including rare species. And so one of the questions that we're sort of grappling with today is how do we prioritize for a seed bank? Do we look at species at risk? Do we look at species that are rare globally? Do we look at cultural species? And in a lot of cases, there are areas where these overlap, such as the coast manroot, the Mara origanus, which is federally endangered and provincially red listed, and seems to have a very strong connection to Indigenous cultures. The early herbarium label for one of the sites had it listed as being in an Indian garden. And so it seems quite clear that it's a really important cultural plant and important species, and there's only 4 locations of it in Canada. So it's a super interesting species that probably was moved to where it is because it's an important plant, in the same way that I want raspberries in my garden. If you have an important cultural connection to a species, you want it close by and you want to be able to use it. So because of all of these different reasons for prioritizing species, I'm really grateful to everyone that's able to attend today, to be able to be part of this open and collaborative conversation as a foundation for the BC Seedbank. And just from the talks that we've had today and the conversations that we've had, it's really helped me to understand the full breadth of what we're getting into and all of the different components, and how all of the different people that are at this meeting today have elements that they might be able to contribute or learn. And it's like having all of these different little bits and pieces are what is going to be necessary for things to come together. So this is the yellow sand verbena, which is a provincially blue listed species, and that is also strongly connected to the sand verbena moth, which is red listed and endangered. And, in the same way that we need to be preserving these rare species for ourselves, that was something that just came up in one of the breakout rooms, was that maybe that also needs to be part of our prioritization species, is that we need to be looking at which species do we need to protect in order to not just have them for the rare plant species, but what about species like rare moths? And these are obligate species with each other. So we need to be thinking about those kinds of elements as well as we move forward with this seed bank journey. And as Lindsay stated earlier in the beginning of the introduction, there's just so many threats to rare plants right now. There's massive catastrophic fires that throughout BC that are having huge impacts on landscapes. As we shift to stranger weather patterns and fire suppression, we're also having huge shrubbification of woody species moving into open Garry oak meadows and into other grasslands. We're having shifts in alpines, so tree levels are changing, snow melts are shifting. We're having decoupling of bloom times and pollinators. We're having hyperherbivory because of changes in landscape use and removal of top-tier predators and invasive insects. So that's one of the big threats for meadow thistle that has a weevil that was introduced for non-native species that is now impacting this rare thistle that grows in the interior of BC. So I think that, the value of seed banks is absolutely critical as a safety net, as a backstop. They're certainly not a replacement for land conservation, stewardship, or restoration. We need to make sure that we're doing the work to maintain where these populations are in the wild. And we also need to be aware that seed banks don't continue to adjust to climate change and ongoing management. But when I was in one of the breakout rooms, Donnie McPhee also made the really good point that we also need to be thinking about the more common species, that if we're waiting until species are at risk, then not only are we more limited in the full genetic breadth, what we're able to collect, we're also faced with higher amounts of red tape to just kind of wade through to get permissions and go through SARA permitting and all of those kinds of complications. So there has to be a balance because we've got only so much time and money to be able to do this work. It sort of falls into that prioritization, but I think it's a really key concept to think about. And one of the most exciting things for me about developing the seed bank is the support for the research that goes alongside it. We know so little about the germination requirements of many of our species at risk. These are two species that there are some kind of funky germination things going on with. I know Nathan Fisk out at Fort Rod Hill was working on collecting pollen from Mill Hill to pollinate deltoid balsam root at Fort Rod in order to be able to see if they can get some viable seed happening. And there's something strange going on with Howell's Tritolea. There's often in areas where there's a lot of blooming, like at Cowichan Garry Oak Preserve, you don't get a lot of viable seed being produced. So those are two kind of complex species that, if we're going out and we're doing targeted seed collection, then it's a way of finding out those bottlenecks for some of these species. If we go out and collect a bunch of things and it's like there's no seed in here, then we know that those species aren't actually producing active viable seed. Or if we have low germination rates, then that's really important information to have. Or if we have amazing germination rates and we're not seeing any seedlings, then it does help to sort of pinpoint what's going on. Like maybe there just aren't the safe sites for germination. Maybe there's predation of the seed. Maybe there's other factors going on. So not only does it act to have a library and a backup system, it also can help for understanding these species better and helping with their recovery. So a big question is how do we move forward? This is Hibberson's trillium, which is a BC endemic species that is found up on the west coast, up by Cayucot, and up on the far expanse of the west coast. And it's an interesting, trilliums in general are really interesting because they have these fatty bodies connected to the seeds called the lyosomes, and they are ant dispersed. And so it sort of feels like we have the same sort of process of how do we move this, we're these little ants and we're trying to create this big system, and how do we move forward with trying to bring all these pieces together. There's a lot of seed banks globally, over 1,500. including the Doomsday Vault in Svalbard, Norway, which is the largest seed bank. But there's a lot of opportunities for having smaller scale, more diffuse, like the work that Mary Notwood is doing of having localized small scale seed banks with different nations is really exciting. And we have some really incredible people that we can partner with. And so there's some sort of big questions of where do we go from here? Who should be the repository for the BC Seed Bank? There's the Ministry of Forests with Dave Colatello has a tree seed bank in BC that doesn't currently have the capacity to be able to support the work, but they're getting some new freezers. So there's options through that. There's also the Native Tree Seed Center in Fredericton. And so that's a really great opportunity for us to be able to work with them. I think that we probably would need to work quite closely to be able to really fine tune some of these really small seed lots. It's my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but that the Native Tree Seed Center right now is focused on woody species, trees and shrubs. And so there will be some learning curves for addressing how to deal with these, like a seed packet where you have 3 seeds, which is much smaller scale, some really different possibly germination requirements, and just some sort of tweaking for dealing with rare species. There's also the University of Washington Seed Bank and Portland State University, which both are more focused on rare species and maybe better suited for dealing with some of the species we have, because there's some overlap with the rare species, both being on coastal North America. But then there's also challenges involved with shipping seeds across the border, looking at phytosanitary certifications, having inspections, and there's also probably more fees involved in them. Wendy was really great to come up with an estimate of about $2,100 per seed lot. So that would be one collection of those 3,000 seeds from one site for the like 50 to 60 maternal collections. So if we're looking at the number of vascular plants at risk in BC times that number times multiple populations for each one, it becomes a really expensive proposition. So these are all things that we sort of need to weigh in moving forward. I think there's a lot of really exciting opportunities for collecting rare seed. There's rare plant monitoring programs that present opportunities for rare seed. So the idea that Wendy's program of having some sort of a volunteer rare plant monitoring program that is tied to rare seed collection is really interesting. Because if you have a group of people that are going out and know exactly where the plants are, can do an evaluation of like, okay, what's the bloom this year? Is it a good year for this species? And then they'll know exactly where those plants are to be able to go back later in the season to collect seed, is a really interesting opportunity. And there's also some small scale reintroduction projects happening, or translocation projects happening. This is out in just outside of Castlegar with Lindy Lynn and Kaylee. Lindy's on the call. I don't know if Kaylee is, where we did some planting of hairy paintbrush, which is a red listed endangered plant. So there are opportunities when we're out doing these kinds of projects to be pinching a little bit extra for the seed bank, or having that kind of rolled into the same project. But there's still a lot of questions about how we move forward from here, about capacity and the facilities and the training. And it's really fabulous to have everyone in the same virtual room to be able to move this discussion forward. And I really hope that this is the launch pad to get this going, and that we're able to get people really inspired about this project and figure out, where the holes are, who's able to help with what, and actually make this a reality in the near future moving forward. And I just want to say thanks to everyone for joining me and for being part of this conversation today. Really appreciate it.